April 18, 1942. Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle stood on pitching deck of aircraft carrier USS Hornet, 650 miles east of Japan, watching waves crash over Bow. Behind him, 16 North American B-25 Mitchell bombers were lined up on flight deck packed so tightly that wingtips nearly touched Carrier Island. These medium bombers had never been launched from aircraft carrier before. B-25s were too large, too heavy, and required more runway than carrier deck provided. Yet here they sat, loaded with bombs and fuel, preparing to do impossible. Weather was deteriorating. Seas were rough. Japanese patrol boat had spotted Hornet hours earlier, forcing early launch. Instead of launching 450 miles from Japan as planned, crews would take off 650 miles out, meaning they could not return to carrier. Every pilot knew this was one-way mission. They would bomb Japan, then fly west, hoping to reach airfields in China. Many would not make it. Doolittle climbed into his B-25 No. 1 positioned closest to Bow. Engines roared to life. Carrier turned into wind. Deck officer gave signal. Doolittle released brakes, and bomber accelerated down deck. Aircraft reached end of deck just as nose lifted. Doolittle was airborne, heading for Tokyo. First American air raid on Japanese homeland had begun. This mission would accomplish little militarily, but would shake Japanese confidence, boost American morale, and prove that Japan was vulnerable. This is story of 80 brave men who volunteered for mission they knew was suicide, and how their courage changed course of Pacific War. Planning for raid on Japan began weeks after Pearl Harbor attack. American military and political leaders wanted to strike back at Japan, demonstrating that United States would not accept defeat passively. However, practical difficulties were enormous. Japan was thousands of miles from American bases. Army Air Force's bombers lacked range to reach Japan from nearest American-controlled airfields. Navy aircraft carriers could approach close enough for carrier aircraft to strike, but Japanese air defenses would destroy slow carrier bombers. What was needed was long-range bomber that could be launched from carrier fly to Japan, drop bombs, and continue to friendly airfields rather than returning to carrier. This concept seemed impossible, but Navy Captain Francis Lowe proposed it to Admiral Ernest King, who approved further study. Army, Air Forces, and Navy worked together developing plan. B-25 Mitchell medium bomber was selected because it had range, payload, and size that might work. However, B-25 had never operated from carriers. Test launches were conducted in February 1942 at Norfolk, Virginia. B-25s successfully took off from carrier USS Hornet, proving concept was feasible, though risky. Pilots needed extensive training because carrier takeoff technique differed completely from normal runway operations. Bomber had to reach flying speed within 500 feet of deck length available. Timing coordination between pilot and deck officer was critical. Mistake would send bomber into ocean. Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle was selected to lead mission. Doolittle was experienced pilot with background in engineering and test flying. He had set speed records and pioneered instrument flying techniques. At age 45, Doolittle was older than most combat pilots, but his experience and leadership made him ideal choice. Doolittle personally supervised training and preparation, ensuring every detail was addressed. He made clear to volunteers that mission was extremely dangerous, with high probability of casualties. Every man volunteered anyway. 16 B-25 crews were selected from volunteers. 80 men total would participate in raid. Crews trained at Eglin Field, Florida, practicing short takeoffs and low-level navigation. Security was extremely tight. Crews were told they would participate in dangerous mission, but not given details about target until after departure. Training emphasized fuel conservation because mission would push B-25s to maximum range. Navigation training focused on overwater flight and landfall recognition. Gunnery training prepared crews for Japanese fighter interception. Modifications were made to B-25 bombers for mission. Additional fuel tanks were installed in fuselage and bomb bay, increasing fuel capacity. Defensive armament was reduced to save weight. Lower turret was removed and replaced with fake guns made from broomsticks painted black to deceive Japanese fighters. Each bomber carried 4 500-pound bombs, mix of demolition and incendiary weapons. Bomb sites were simplified because attacks would be made from low altitude against area targets rather than precision bombing. USS Hornet departed San Francisco on April 2, 1942, with 16 B-25s secured to flight deck. Carrier sailed west toward Japan, rendezvous with Task Force 16, commanded by Admiral William Halsey, aboard carrier USS Enterprise. Enterprise would provide fighter cover and scout ahead for Japanese forces. Hornet could not launch its own fighters because deck was crowded with B-25s. This made Task Force vulnerable to Japanese attack. Speed and stealth were essential. Doolittle briefed crews after departure, revealing target for first time. Raid would strike Tokyo, Yokohama, Osaka, Kobe, and Nagoya. Crews would bomb military targets, including factories, airfields, and port facilities. Civilian casualties were to be avoided, though this would be difficult given primitive bomb sites and low-altitude attacks. After bombing, aircraft would fly west to airfields in China, controlled by Chinese nationalists. Chinese would refuel bombers, allowing them to fly to final destination at Chongqing. This plan depended on Chinese cooperation and favorable weather, both uncertain factors. Task Force sailed across Pacific, maintaining radio silence to avoid detection. Crews passed time studying maps and checking equipment. Tension increased as ships approached Japan. Success depended on launching at planned distance, allowing bombers to reach China with minimal fuel reserves. Early launch would doom crews to running out of fuel over ocean or Japanese-held territory. However, risk of early detection increased every hour Task Force steamed toward Japan. On morning of April 18th, Japanese patrol boat Nito Maru spotted Task Force 650 miles east of Japan. Patrol boat radioed warning before being sunk by USS Nashville. Halsey made decision to launch immediately, even though bombers were 200 miles farther from Japan than planned. Early launch meant crews would have less fuel for flight to China, increasing risk they would crash land short of airfields. However, staying on course risked Japanese air attack on Task Force. Launch began at 0800 hours, approximately 7 hours earlier than planned. Doolittle's bomber launched first from position closest to bow. His aircraft accelerated down deck lifted, just as wheels reached end and climbed away from carrier. 15 more B-25s followed successfully. Some barely cleared deck with wheels skimming wave tops. Every pilot had practiced carrier takeoffs, but doing it for real in rough seas with full combat load was terrifying. All 16 bombers launched successfully, remarkable achievement, given conditions and improvised nature of operation. Bombers flew west in loose formation, staying low to avoid detection. Japanese home islands appeared on horizon after 4 hours' flight. Pilots descended to treetop level, approaching targets. Japanese air defense radar was primitive, and low-altitude approach helped avoid detection. However, some bombers were spotted by Japanese civilians who reported aircraft to authorities. Japanese military initially thought bombers were friendly because no one believed American aircraft could reach Japan. Doolittle's crew reached Tokyo at approximately noon local time. City was bustling with normal activity. air raid sirens had not sounded. Japanese assumed if bombers were enemy, they would have been detected long before reaching capital. This complacency gave raiders crucial advantage. Doolittle's bombardier released bombs on industrial area in northern Tokyo. Bombs struck factory buildings, starting fires. Doolittle turned west, heading for China. Other bombers struck targets across Tokyo, Yokohama, Osaka, Kobe, and Nagoya. Most attacks occurred around midday when Japanese were unprepared. Bombs hit factories, docks, warehouses, and military installations. Some bombs fell in residential areas, causing civilian casualties, though crews attempted to avoid non-military targets. Total damage was modest compared to later strategic bombing campaigns. Perhaps 50 people were killed and 100 injured. Property damage was limited to several dozen buildings destroyed or damaged. Military impact was negligible. However, psychological impact was enormous. Japanese public and military were shocked that American bombers reached homeland. Japanese propaganda had promised that sacred soil of empire would never be violated by enemy. Raid shattered this illusion. Japanese civilians lost confidence in military's ability to protect them. Military leaders were humiliated. Emperor questioned why American bombers flew over Palace without being intercepted. This blow to prestige had far-reaching consequences. Japanese military reacted by recalling fighter squadrons from front lines to defend homeland. Aircraft desperately needed in Pacific operations were diverted to air defense, reducing Japanese offensive capability. Japanese Army accelerated plan to capture airfields in China used by Doolittle raiders. This offensive killed thousands of Chinese civilians in retaliation for assistance given to American crews. Japanese Navy pushed for operation to eliminate American carriers, leading to Battle of Midway, where Japanese suffered catastrophic defeat. Thus, raid indirectly shaped subsequent Pacific War, though raiders could not have predicted these consequences. After bombing, American crews faced desperate flight to China. Bombers flew west, crossing East China Sea as daylight faded. Weather deteriorated with heavy clouds and rain reducing visibility. Navigation became difficult without visual landmarks. Fuel gauges showed tanks nearly empty. Radio navigation aids that Chinese had promised to activate were not functioning. Crews searched desperately for airfields, but found only darkness and mountains. Doolittle's crew flew until fuel ran out, then bailed out over Chinese countryside. Crew survived parachute jumps, though Doolittle injured his ankle landing in rice paddy. Chinese peasants helped crew reach friendly forces. Doolittle believed mission had failed because he lost all aircraft and feared court-martial for leading such expensive failure. However, military leadership viewed raid as tremendous success because of morale boost and impact on Japanese. 15 other B-25 crews faced similar situations. 11 crews bailed out over China. One crew landed at Soviet airfield at Vladivostok, where plane and crew were interned because Soviet Union was not at war with Japan. 4 crews crashed or made emergency landings in Japanese-held territory. 1 B-25 ditched in ocean off Chinese coast, with crew surviving. Total of 69 crewmen survived and eventually returned to American control. 3 were killed in crashes or bailouts. 8 were captured by Japanese. Treatment of captured American airmen by Japanese was brutal. Crew of one bomber that crashed near Japanese-occupied Chinese city was captured. 8 men, including pilot, were taken to Tokyo for interrogation, then sent to Shanghai for trial. Japanese accused them of war crimes, claiming they deliberately bombed civilians. Military tribunals sentenced all 8 to death, though sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment for 5 men. 3 airmen were executed by firing squad in October 1942. This execution of prisoners violated international law and demonstrated Japanese disregard for Geneva Convention protections. 5 imprisoned airmen endured horrific conditions. They were held in solitary confinement, given inadequate food, and denied medical care. 1 prisoner died of malnutrition and disease in December 1943. 4 survived until war's end, weighing barely 100 pounds, when liberated in August 1945. Their suffering exemplified broader Japanese mistreatment of prisoners, though their story received less attention than other POW atrocities. Chinese civilians and military personnel who assisted Doolittle raiders paid terrible price. Japanese launched punitive expedition called Zhejiang Jiangxi Campaign to destroy airfields and punish Chinese for helping Americans. Campaign lasted several months, resulting in deaths of estimated 250,000 Chinese civilians. Japanese troops destroyed villages, murdered civilians, and employed biological weapons, spreading cholera and plague. This retaliation far exceeded any damage Doolittle raid inflicted, demonstrating Japanese military's vicious response to humiliation. American public reaction to raid was euphoric. News of attack on Japan lifted morale throughout United States. After months of defeats and bad news from Pacific, raid provided first success story. Headlines proclaimed Tokyo bombed, and papers printed maps showing raid route. Public did not know details about losses or difficulties crews faced. Military censorship ensured only positive aspects were reported. Doolittle became instant hero, awarded Medal of Honor, and promoted 2 ranks to Brigadier General, skipping rank of Colonel entirely. President Franklin Roosevelt held press conference about raid. When asked where bombers came from, Roosevelt joked they flew from Shangri-La mythical paradise from novel Lost Horizon. This humorous evasion protected operational security while building mystique around raid. Navy later named aircraft carrier USS Shangri-La in reference to Roosevelt's quip. Raid became legendary in American culture, symbolizing determination to strike back at Japan despite enormous odds. Strategic value of raid has been debated by historians. Militarily, damage inflicted was minimal. Japan's war-making capacity was barely affected. However, psychological and strategic effects were significant. American morale received crucial boost at time when Pacific War seemed lost. Japanese recalled resources for homeland defense, weakening offensive operations. Battle of Midway stemmed partly from Japanese desire to eliminate American carriers after raid. Capture of Midway would have extended Japanese defensive perimeter, preventing future raids. Japanese loss at Midway became turning point of Pacific War. Thus, raid had butterfly effect, leading to consequences far beyond bombs dropped. Individual stories of raiders illustrate courage and sacrifice mission required. Captain Edward York commanded crew that landed in Soviet Union. Soviets interned Americans because attacking Japan from Soviet territory would violate neutrality. York and crew spent year in internment camps before escaping to Iran with assistance from American intelligence. York's wartime service ended in captivity rather than combat, but he and crew eventually returned home. Lieutenant Robert Gray's crew crashed in Japanese-held territory. Gray and crew were captured, becoming prisoners who faced execution. Gray was one of 3 executed by firing squad in Tokyo in October 1942. His sacrifice demonstrated ultimate cost some raiders paid. Gray's parents did not learn of his death until after war, when details of Japanese atrocity emerged. Corporal Jacob DeShazer served as bombardier on crew captured by Japanese. DeShazer survived 40 months of captivity under brutal conditions. After war, he returned to Japan as Christian missionary, forgiving captors and working for reconciliation. His transformation from warrior to peacemaker illustrated complex legacies of war. De Shazer spent 30 years in Japan, sharing message of forgiveness, earning respect from Japanese people. Sergeant David Thatcher served as engineer-gunner on crew that ditched in ocean off Chinese coast. Crew survived, but several were injured. Thatcher tended wounded comrades, while Chinese fishermen rescued them. Thatcher's medical care saved lives, earning him Silver Star. His story demonstrated that heroism in war included caring for injured, not just combat actions. Lieutenant Ted Lawson piloted bomber that crashed on Chinese beach. Lawson was severely injured in crash, losing leg below knee. Chinese doctors amputated leg without anesthesia in primitive conditions. Lawson survived and wrote memoir 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, published in 1943. Book became bestseller and was adapted into 1944 film spreading story of raid to wide audience. Lawson's account emphasized both adventure and hardship of mission. Engineering marvel of launching B-25s from carrier deserved recognition. Navy deck crews worked miracles, fitting 16 bombers on carrier deck with minimal clearance. Positioning required exact measurements and skilled seamanship. Bombers could not start engines until launch because deck was too crowded to taxi. Each aircraft had to be positioned precisely and launched in sequence. Deck crews accomplished this under pressure of combat situation, demonstrating professionalism and skill. Their contribution often gets overlooked in accounts focused on pilots, but mission would have failed without their expertise. Modifications to B-25s showed innovative engineering. Adding fuel tanks required reconfiguring bomber interior. Crews had to climb over fuel tanks, crawling through restricted spaces. Weight distribution changed, affecting handling characteristics. Engineers calculated fuel requirements, accounting for every variable, including headwinds, weather, and potential combat maneuvering. These calculations meant difference between reaching China or crashing in ocean. Precision engineering enabled mission, demonstrating importance of technical support to combat operations. Chinese assistance was crucial to raids' limited success. Chinese nationalists operated airfields where bombers were supposed to land. Chinese civilians and soldiers helped rescue downed crews. Chinese paid terrible price in Japanese retaliation, but continued supporting American war effort. This sacrifice demonstrated alliance between United States and China, forged in shared struggle against Japanese aggression. American gratitude to Chinese helpers was sincere, but could not prevent horrific Japanese revenge attacks. Soviet internment of York's crew created diplomatic complications. Soviet Union was not at war with Japan and feared Japanese reaction to American bombers operating from Soviet territory. Interning crew maintained technical neutrality, though it angered Americans. Eventually, Soviet authorities quietly allowed York and crew to escape to Iran, maintaining fiction they had fled rather than been released. This delicate handling preserved Soviet-Japanese peace while accommodating American ally. Episode illustrated complex diplomacy of World War II, where nations pursued multiple interests simultaneously. Long-term health effects affected some raiders. Stress of mission and subsequent hardships caused physical and psychological problems. Former POWs suffered lasting trauma from captivity. Some developed survivor guilt about comrades who died. Post-traumatic stress was not recognized diagnosis in 1940s, but symptoms were real. Veterans coped privately with limited support. Some turned to alcohol. Others found solace in veteran organizations where shared experience provided understanding. These hidden costs of raid emerged decades later as raiders aged and reflected on experiences. Annual reunions of Doolittle Raiders became tradition. Survivors gathered annually to remember mission and honor fallen comrades. During World War II, Doolittle established tradition of toasting departed comrades using special silver goblets, engraved with each raider's name. Goblets were kept in special carrying case. At reunion, survivors performed ceremony, where goblets of deceased raiders were turned upside down, and survivors drank toast to their memory. This ritual continued for decades as surviving raiders dwindled. Final reunion occurred in 2013, when only 4 raiders remained. Last surviving Doolittle raider died in 2019 at age 103. Lieutenant Colonel Richard Cole served as Doolittle's co-pilot on lead bomber. Cole lived 77 years after Raid, remaining humble about his role. His death ended direct connection to mission, leaving only historical records and artifacts. Veterans Affairs held memorial service honoring all raiders. Their generation that fought World War II was passing into history, leaving future generations responsibility to remember their sacrifice. Museum exhibits preserve Doolittle Raid history. National Museum of United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, displays artifacts including Cole's uniform and Doolittle's Medal of Honor. Aircraft carrier USS Hornet is museum ship in Alameda, California, where visitors can see deck from which B-25s launched. China maintains memorials where raiders crashed, honoring American airmen and Chinese who helped them. These physical reminders help new generations understand Raid's significance. Hollywood films portrayed Raid shaping popular memory. 30 Seconds Over, Tokyo, 1944, film starring Spencer Tracy and Van Johnson brought story to wartime audiences. Pearl Harbor 2001 film included dramatized raid sequence introducing story to modern viewers. Accuracy varied between films, but they kept memory alive in popular culture. Films emphasized heroism and adventure, sometimes oversimplifying complex realities of mission. Historians debate whether cinematic portrayals help or hinder public understanding of historical events. Educational curriculum includes Doolittle Raid, teaching students about early Pacific War and American determination. Teachers use Raid to discuss topics including military innovation, strategic bombing effects, and prisoner treatment. Primary sources, including Raiders' memoirs, provide first-hand accounts. Students learn that heroism involves risk, sacrifice, and consequences. Raid serves as case study, showing how individual courage combines with technological capability and strategic planning to achieve objectives. Comparison with other early war operations reveals Raid's unique characteristics. Bataan Death March and Fall of Philippines demonstrated American vulnerability. Battle of Coral Sea was tactical draw, providing little morale boost. Doolittle Raid, although militarily insignificant, provided desperately needed victory narrative. This psychological dimension made Raid strategically valuable despite modest material effects. Understanding this helps explain why Raid received disproportionate attention relative to damage inflicted. Japanese perspective on Raid evolved over time. Initial reaction was shock and anger. Military propaganda downplayed damage while promising revenge. Execution of captured raiders satisfied desire for retribution, though it violated laws of war. Post-war Japanese historians acknowledged Raid's impact on military strategy, particularly decision to attack Midway. Modern Japanese view Raid as example of American capability and determination. Some Japanese conservatives criticize Raid as terror bombing of civilians, though this interpretation is controversial given limited targeting of civilian areas. Ethical questions about Raid include whether bombing cities was justified and whether Japanese execution of prisoners was proportionate response. International law in 1940s was less developed than modern standards. Strategic bombing was accepted practice, though targeting civilians was supposed to be avoided. Doolittle raiders attempted to hit military targets, but bombs fell in residential areas. Japanese execution of prisoners clearly violated Geneva Convention, regardless of American actions. These ethical complexities defy simple judgments, requiring nuanced understanding of wartime context and moral standards. Legacy of Doolittle Raid extends beyond World War II. Raid demonstrated that creative tactical thinking could overcome apparent impossibility. B-25s were not designed for carrier operations, but modifications and training made impossible mission possible. This lesson influenced military planning, emphasizing adaptability over rigid adherence to doctrine. Modern special operations trace philosophical lineage to raids like Doolittle's, showing that small units with specialized training can achieve strategic effects disproportionate to their size. Raid also demonstrated importance of morale in warfare. Material damage was minimal, but psychological boost to American home front was enormous. Japanese confidence was shaken, and resources were diverted from offensive operations. These intangible effects proved more valuable than bombs dropped. Military planners learned that public perception and enemy psychology mattered as much as physical destruction. This understanding shaped subsequent operations, including atomic bombing of Japan, where psychological shock was primary objective. Courage of 80 raiders who volunteered for mission. Knowing survival was unlikely represents highest ideals of military service. These men accepted orders to fly into certain danger with minimal chance of returning. Their motivation included patriotism, desire for revenge after Pearl Harbor, and simple determination to strike back at enemy. Personal courage enabled mission success, demonstrating that human factors, technology, and planning must combine for military effectiveness. Raiders exemplified values their generation called duty, honor, and country. Doolittle Raid occurred at desperate moment when Allied prospects looked grim. German forces dominated Europe. Japanese swept across Pacific. American military had suffered continuous defeats. Raid provided ray of hope, showing that America could strike back. This psychological uplift sustained home front morale, enabling industrial mobilization and military recruitment. Without victories, however small to celebrate, public might have wavered in commitment to long, difficult war. Raid came at perfect moment, providing hope when hope was desperately needed. April 18, 1942 stands as date when impossibility became reality. 80 men in 16 bombers achieved mission experts said could not be done. They launched heavy bombers from carrier deck, bombed Japan, flew to China, and majority survived. 3 died in crashes. 8 became prisoners, 3 executed, and 5 surviving captivity. 69 returned to American control. Every man who participated became hero. Their mission boosted American morale, shocked Japanese leadership, diverted Japanese resources, and indirectly led to Midway victory. Material damage was negligible, but strategic, psychological, political effects were profound. Doolittle Raid proved that courage, innovation, and determination could overcome impossible odds, changing how both sides viewed Pacific War, and demonstrating that Japan, despite early victories, was vulnerable to American power that would ultimately destroy empire that attacked Pearl Harbor. Those 80 raiders deserve remembrance, not just for what they accomplished, but for what they represented: American refusal to accept defeat, American willingness to take extreme risks, and American determination to win war, regardless of cost. Their legacy endures as inspiration, reminding future generations that impossible is merely word, and that courage can change history. Detailed examination of individual crew experiences reveals human dimension of Raid. Crew number 3, piloted by Lieutenant Robert Gray, faced particularly tragic fate. After bombing Tokyo, Gray's bomber ran out of fuel over Japanese-occupied China. Crew attempted crash landing, but aircraft hit mountain. 2 crew members died in crash. Remaining 6, including Gray, were captured by Japanese troops. They were taken to Shanghai, where Japanese held them for months before transferring to Tokyo for show trial. Gray maintained dignified bearing throughout interrogation, refusing to provide information beyond name rank and serial number. His courage under torture impressed even his captors, though it did not prevent his execution. Sergeant Harold Spatz served as Gray's flight engineer. Spatz was among 8 captured raiders. During captivity, Japanese subjected him to water torture, sleep deprivation, and beatings. Spatz witnessed execution of 3 fellow raiders, including Gray. He and 4 others were sentenced to life imprisonment. Conditions in Japanese prison were horrific. Food consisted of thin rice soup. Medical care was non-existent. Spatz developed dysentery and beriberi. His weight dropped from 170 pounds to 90 pounds. When American forces liberated him in August 1945, Spatz could barely walk. He spent months in hospital recovering. Physical wounds healed, but psychological scars remained. Spatz rarely discussed captivity, with family finding memories too painful. Only in final years did he share experiences with historians, ensuring record of Japanese atrocities was preserved. Lieutenant Dean Hallmark piloted bomber that ditched in ocean off Chinese coast after running out of fuel. Hallmark and crew survived ditching, but were weakened by exposure. Chinese fishermen rescued them, but Japanese patrols captured crew before they could reach friendly lines. Hallmark was executed alongside Gray and another raider in Tokyo. His death was particularly tragic because he survived combat only to be murdered while prisoner. Hallmark's family learned of his death only after war, when American investigators documented Japanese war crimes. Discovery that captured raiders had been executed sparked outrage, contributing to determination to prosecute Japanese officials after surrender. Corporal William Dieter served as bombardier on Hallmark's crew. Dieter was among 5 raiders whose death sentences were commuted to life imprisonment. During captivity, Dieter maintained hope through faith and determination. He made mental plans for future after liberation, describing house he would build and family he would raise. Fellow prisoners later said Dieter's optimism helped them survive darkest moments. When liberation came, Dieter weighed 85 pounds, barely recognizable. Recovery took year of hospitalization and rehabilitation. Dieter fulfilled his dreams building house he had imagined and raising family. He lived until 1992, grateful for every day after captivity. Navigator Chase Nielsen survived imprisonment alongside Dieter. Nielsen endured 40 months of torture, starvation, and solitary confinement. Japanese interrogators demanded information about American codes and future operations. Nielsen refused revealing anything beyond required information. His resistance cost him beatings that left permanent injuries. Nielsen witnessed death of fellow prisoner from malnutrition. He feared he would die before liberation. When American troops freed him in August 1945, Nielsen wept with relief. Post-war life brought challenges. Nielsen struggled with nightmares and anger about treatment. Therapy helped him process trauma. Nielsen became advocate for POW issues, ensuring captured servicemen received support. His advocacy influenced veterans programs, helping countless former prisoners. Lieutenant Robert Hite served as co-pilot on Hallmark's crew and survived imprisonment. Hite's experience mirrored that of other imprisoned raiders with torture, malnutrition, and disease. What distinguished Hite was his determination to document Japanese atrocities. Despite risk of discovery, Haidt secretly recorded events using materials smuggled by sympathetic prison guard. These records provided evidence used in war crimes trials after surrender. Haidt testified at trials describing specific acts of torture and execution. His testimony contributed to convictions of Japanese officers responsible for mistreatment. Haidt believed bearing witness was duty to fallen comrades. His courage in documenting crimes ensured perpetrators faced justice. Sergeant George Barr completed imprisoned raiders' number. Barr suffered particularly severe treatment because Japanese suspected he was intelligence officer. Extended interrogation sessions left him with broken bones and internal injuries. Barr developed tuberculosis from unsanitary conditions. His condition was so grave that fellow prisoners doubted he would survive. Remarkably, Barr lived until liberation, though his health never fully recovered. Post-war, Barr required ongoing medical care for tuberculosis and injuries from beatings. Veterans Administration provided treatment, but could not undo damage. Barr's suffering exemplified lasting costs of captivity, extending far beyond physical liberation. Raiders who successfully escaped to free China faced different challenges. Most crews bailed out in darkness over unfamiliar terrain. Parachute landings resulted in injuries, including sprains, fractures, and lacerations. Crews scattered across countryside had to find each other while avoiding Japanese patrols. Some raiders were aided by Chinese villagers who risked their lives providing food, shelter, and guidance to safety. Other raiders encountered bandits who robbed them. Navigation to friendly lines required days of hiking through mountains. Exhaustion, hunger, and injuries made journey arduous. Several raiders described it as more frightening than raid itself because they were isolated without support. Lieutenant Richard Cole served as Doolittle's co-pilot on lead bomber. After bailing out, Cole landed in rice paddy, sustaining minor injuries. Chinese farmers helped him locate other crew members. Reunion was emotional as crew feared members had died in bailout. Chinese guides led them to nationalist-controlled territory where they received medical care and food. Journey took weeks of difficult travel. Cole remained in China for months helping with war effort before returning to United States. He flew combat missions in Europe later in war. Cole's long life after raid demonstrated that many raiders continued serving. Some became senior officers. Others left military for civilian careers. All carried memories of April 18, 1942. Captain David Jones piloted bomber that reached China safely. Jones and crew bailed out successfully and were rescued by Chinese guerrillas. However, during journey to safety, crew was ambushed by Japanese patrol. Brief firefight erupted. Jones and crew escaped, but incident demonstrated ongoing danger even after leaving Japan. Eventually reaching friendly forces, Jones reported details of his bombing run and escape. Military intelligence used this information, improving future operations. Jones later commanded bomber squadron in Europe, completing distinguished career. He never forgot Chinese who helped him, crediting them with his survival. Lieutenant William Farrow piloted bomber that crashed in Japanese-occupied territory. Farrow and crew were captured and became 3 of 8 imprisoned raiders. Farrow was executed alongside Gray and Hallmark in October 1942. Before execution, Farrow wrote letter to parents expressing love and asking them not to grieve. Letter was smuggled out of prison and delivered after war. Farrow's final words demonstrated courage and faith. His parents treasured letter as connection to son they would never see again. Farrow's sacrifice inspired others, showing that even facing death raiders maintained dignity and honor. Technical aspects of raid deserve deeper examination. B-25 Mitchell bomber was versatile aircraft used throughout war in multiple roles. For Doolittle Raid, modifications were extensive. Extra fuel tanks increased range from 1,300 miles to 2,400 miles. This extension was necessary to reach Japan from carrier and continue to China. However, added fuel weight reduced payload and affected handling. Pilots had to adjust techniques compensating for altered center of gravity. Engineers calculated precise fuel loads, ensuring maximum range while maintaining flyability. These calculations represented cutting-edge aeronautical engineering for early 1940s. Fake defensive guns installed to deceive Japanese fighters were clever improvisation. Broomsticks, painted black and mounted in empty gun positions, created illusion of armed bomber. Japanese pilots maintaining distance to avoid gunfire gave American bombers precious seconds. This psychological deception demonstrated that warfare involves more than firepower. Perception and morale matter. Small innovations like fake guns could influence combat outcomes disproportionate to their actual capability. Bomb site simplification reflected mission profile. Precision bombing required complex Norden bomb site. However, low-altitude attacks against area targets did not need such sophistication. Simpler sites saved weight and complexity. Bombardiers trained on modified site, becoming proficient in short time. This adaptation showed military's flexibility, adjusting technology to mission requirements rather than forcing missions to fit available technology. Modern military continues this tradition, developing mission-specific equipment rather than relying solely on standard gear. Navigation challenges were formidable, given technology available in 1942. Dead reckoning using compass speed and time calculations was primary navigation method. Over ocean with no landmarks, small errors accumulated. Wind drift affected course. Pilots compensated using best estimates, but precision was impossible. Celestial navigation using sun and stars helped but required clear skies. Clouds common over Pacific obscured stars, making celestial fixes unavailable. Radio navigation aids existed, but were unreliable over long distances. Crews relied heavily on pilot skill and luck, finding their way across thousands of miles of ocean to tiny island targets, then continuing to Chinese airfields in darkness. That any crews reached destinations demonstrated exceptional airmanship. Communication challenges compounded difficulties. Radio equipment in 1942 was primitive by modern standards. Range was limited. Atmospheric conditions affected reliability. Crews maintained radio silence approaching Japan to avoid detection. After bombing, communication with Chinese ground stations failed, preventing navigation guidance. Crews searched blindly for airfields, hearing no beacons or voice directions. This communication breakdown contributed to crashes and forced bailouts. Subsequent operations emphasized reliable navigation aids, learning from Doolittle Raid's difficulties. Weather forecasting in 1942 lacked modern satellite imagery and computer modeling. Meteorologists aboard Hornet predicted conditions based on limited observations and historical patterns. Forecast proved incorrect as weather deteriorated faster than expected. Storm front over China created zero visibility, preventing crews from finding airfields. Modern forecasting would have predicted these conditions, allowing mission planners to delay or adjust. However, in 1942, crews flew into unknown weather conditions, demonstrating additional risk they accepted. Training program for raiders became model for future special operations. Intensive preparation focused on specific mission requirements. Crews practiced carrier takeoffs until proficient. Low-level navigation was rehearsed. Fuel management techniques were taught. This specialized training contrasted with general bomber crew training, emphasizing that elite missions required elite preparation. Modern special operations forces trace lineage to programs like Doolittle Training, showing importance of tailored preparation for unique missions. Security surrounding RAID was remarkable. Despite involving hundreds of personnel, including pilots, mechanics planners, and support staff, mission remained secret until execution. Crews were told they would participate in dangerous mission, but details were withheld until after sailing. This need-to-know approach prevented leaks. Family members were not informed. Even aboard Hornet, sailors speculated about strange bombers on deck, but did not know target. After raid, military maintained partial secrecy, protecting operational details. This security discipline became standard for sensitive operations. Media management after raid balanced public morale with operational security. Government wanted to publicize success boosting morale, but could not reveal details that would help Japanese. Roosevelt's Shangri-La quip provided humorous deflection. Press complied with censorship guidelines, omitting information about losses and difficulties. Public received sanitized version, emphasizing heroism and success. Only after war did fuller picture emerge, including casualties and Japanese execution of prisoners. This wartime information management reflected government's belief that public morale required careful handling. Modern media environment makes such control impossible, but principle remains that sensitive information requires protection. Post-war careers of raiders varied widely. Some remained in military, reaching senior ranks. Colonel Richard Cole served entire career, retiring as lieutenant colonel. Others left military, pursuing civilian opportunities. Several became successful businessmen. Some taught aviation. Few traded on raid fame, preferring quiet lives. Annual reunions kept raiders connected, but otherwise they dispersed across country, living normal post-war lives. This humility characterized Greatest Generation. They had done extraordinary things, but did not seek glory. Duty accomplished, they moved forward. Families of raiders also deserve recognition. Wives and children endured months of uncertainty, not knowing if husbands and fathers had survived. Some families learned loved ones had died. Others welcomed home returning heroes. For families of imprisoned raiders, uncertainty lasted years until war ended. Wives had to assume husbands might be dead, while holding hope they lived. This psychological strain was severe. Children grew up with absent fathers. When raiders returned, families had to adjust. Some marriages survived, others did not. Stress of war and separation broke some families despite love and good intentions. These family impacts represent often overlooked costs of military service, affecting not just service members, but everyone they loved. Chinese retaliation victims deserve remembrance. 250,000 Chinese civilians died in Japanese punitive campaign after raid. Entire villages were destroyed. Survivors were displaced, becoming refugees. Japanese biological warfare experiments used Chinese as test subjects, spreading plague and cholera. These atrocities exceeded anything raiders could have imagined when planning mission. Chinese, who helped American airmen, paid terrible price. Their sacrifice demonstrated that wars harm innocent people far from battlefields. Modern military operations struggle with this reality that even justified actions can have unintended tragic consequences for non-combatants. Chinese assistance to raiders exemplified alliance forged in shared struggle against Japanese aggression. Chinese nationalist forces were fighting Japan since 1937. American entry into war provided allied Chinese desperately needed. Helping Doolittle raiders was natural expression of alliance. However, assistance came at horrific cost, as Japanese retaliated with genocidal fury. Post-war Chinese-American relations were complicated by communist victory in Chinese Civil War. Mainland China became Cold War enemy, while Taiwan maintained alliance. This political shift meant that Chinese who helped raiders became enemies of United States, adding ironic tragedy to their story. Modern reevaluation recognizes Chinese sacrifice regardless of political differences that emerged later. Examination of Japanese response reveals military culture that prized honor and face above rational calculation. Humiliation of raid on capital city was unbearable for military leadership. Response was disproportionate, mobilizing resources for retaliation far exceeding strategic value of preventing future raids. 250,000 Chinese deaths accomplished nothing militarily but satisfied desire for revenge. This pattern repeated throughout Pacific War, with Japanese forces fighting to last man rather than surrendering when defeat was inevitable. Cultural factors shaped Japanese strategy in ways Western observers found irrational, but made sense within Japanese value system. Understanding this cultural dimension helps explain Japanese conduct, including mistreatment of prisoners and civilian populations. Battle of Midway stemmed partly from Japanese desire to eliminate American carriers after Doolittle Raid. Japanese Naval General Staff believed that destroying American fleet would prevent future raids and force negotiated peace. Plan to capture Midway Island would draw American carriers into battle, where superior Japanese forces would destroy them. However, American code breaking provided warning, allowing ambush. Japanese lost 4 carriers, while Americans lost 1. This defeat crippled Japanese offensive capability, marking turning point of Pacific War. Connection between Doolittle Raid and Midway shows how small actions can have cascading effects, changing course of wars in unpredictable ways. Legacy of Doolittle Raid continues influencing modern military thinking. Concept of striking enemy homeland to shake morale remains relevant. However, modern technology allows precision strikes, minimizing civilian casualties. Doolittle raiders could not achieve precision with their equipment. Modern guided munitions enable targeting military assets while avoiding population centers. This capability reflects technological progress, but raises questions about when such strikes are justified. Doolittle Raid occurred when strategic bombing doctrine accepted collateral damage as unavoidable. Modern standards are higher, though debate continues about proportionality and necessity. Commemoration efforts ensure raid remains in public memory. Air Force Academy includes raid in curriculum, teaching cadets about innovation, courage, and strategic thinking. Museums display artifacts including B-25 bombers and personal items from raiders. Documentaries and books continue appearing, introducing new generations to story. However, as last raiders died, direct connection to events faded. Future remembrance depends on institutional commitment and public interest. Maintaining memory across generations requires deliberate effort, fighting natural tendency to forget past events as participants die. Doolittle Raid represents intersection of technology, courage, strategy, and luck that characterizes military operations. Technology provided capability to launch bombers from carrier. Courage motivated men to volunteer for mission knowing survival was unlikely. Strategy identified psychological, rather than material objectives as primary goal. Luck influenced outcomes, with some crews surviving while others died. This combination of factors defies simple analysis. Military planners cannot guarantee success, but can create conditions favoring positive outcomes. Doolittle Raid succeeded because leaders understood this, creating conditions where courage and technology could overcome apparent impossibility. Final reflection on Doolittle Raid requires acknowledging both achievements and costs. Mission boosted American morale, shocked Japanese, and influenced subsequent strategy. These achievements were real and significant. However, costs included 3 American lives, execution of 3 prisoners, death of 5th prisoner in captivity, and 250,000 Chinese civilian deaths. Weighing achievements against costs raises difficult moral questions. Were results worth costs? Could objectives have been achieved differently? These questions lack definitive answers depending on values and perspectives. What remains clear is that 80 men volunteered for mission-knowing risks. Most survived while some paid ultimate price, and their actions influenced course of history in ways both intended and unforeseen. Their courage deserves honor. Their sacrifice demands remembrance. Their story teaches lessons about war's complexity, where victories come with costs and heroism coexists with tragedy. April 18, 1942. When 16 B-25 bombers launched from pitching carrier deck to bomb Japan, stands as date when impossible became possible, and 80 men changed world through courage, determination, and willingness to risk everything for cause greater than themselves. That is legacy worth preserving.